So it's been interesting to see how the reception of Starfield has been like over the course of its post-launch period. On Metacritic right now, it's sitting at an 83 from 90 critics, which is definitely not among the highest rated Bethesda games. Like, not horrible, but, people were definitely, I think, hoping for higher. And then user score is sort of, good to mixed at a 7.0 out of 10 from over 11,000 user ratings. But looking at Steam, the situation is a little more interesting, as Starfield over time has lowered its user review score from like positive to now a mixed score of 69%. Nice, from 81,000 user reviews. The recent scores have been closer to 58%. And the general feedback has been a lot of kind of the issues that I had with the game, which is that while there's some cool like side quest content here and there, some good storylines, gunplay also generally feels pretty good in this game. And I think the shipbuilding aspect is something that's been really well done, with just how customizable ships are, and some of the creations we've seen have been really cool. I was disappointed by the main quest. I was disappointed by how fetch questy it all was and how repetitive it was. And then the exploration, I think, is the biggest qualm that people have with the space element of the game being the thing that gets in the way, because space is just so much empty space that a lot of stuff is now segmented and separated across all these different planets, and so there's no cohesion anymore. It's not just one giant open world that feels like handcrafted, but rather a lot of little things separated across the galaxy, and the planets themselves aren't all that interesting to explore. Even the more handcrafted planets feel like just lesser open worlds compared to one cohesive open world like, Skyrim and stuff like that. And then beyond that, I think just generally the age of the creation engine is starting to show. And while Starfield does use an enhanced version of the creation engine, the foundation of it is still the creation engine. And so the presentation, the AI issues, the animations, and the uncanny valley of NPCs, like there's just a lot here that feels like it hasn't caught up to more modern RPGs and what they've been able to accomplish. While Bethesda games have always been, kind of janky and whatnot, they've always had this fun factor, this sense of wonder of just being able to kind of like go anywhere and always find some curiosity. And with Starfield and how much just loading screens there are, how much stuff is accessed through menus, which are also clumsily implemented, Starfield, I think, loses the one thing that Bethesda games could ride on despite all of the janky elements. And so all the other stuff, all the other flaws just stand out that much more in Starfield. And that's, I think, why we're seeing such a generally mixed score. And compare that to, say, Skyrim, which is sitting at an overwhelmingly positive score of 95%. Even Fallout 4 is sitting at a positive review score of 83%. It's a pretty stark difference. I think there's a general sense that Starfield might be Bethesda's weakest single-player entry, with many calling it the epitome of wide as an ocean, but shallow as a puddle. Even looking at player numbers, while it's natural for a single-player game to eventually dip in player numbers once people are finished with it, it's worth noting that Starfield currently has a 24-hour peak of 18,000 players, which is less than Skyrim's 24-hour peak of 23,000 players, and not too far off from Fallout 4's 24-hour peak of almost 15,000 players. Now, I think that's in part because Fallout 4 and Skyrim do have modding tools that are officially available, so mods play a big part in that. I think when modding tools for Starfield come out, we might see those numbers rise up again. But I think there is a general sense that Starfield is drawing a lot less buzz and a lot less interest, and it's just a game that's a lot less interesting to players compared to past Bethesda releases. And we'll see if that will change with expansions and with mod support. Now, while we wait to see what happens on that front, something that's caught a lot of people's attention is the fact that Bethesda has been responding to negative reviews on Steam. So if we go to Starfield reviews right now and look at the list here, you can see that some of the negative reviews here feature a developer has responded to this review notice that you can click on, and you can find what the developer said. And it's not just one or two reviews, it's quite a number of them. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 just in this one page alone. But I've kind of compiled a couple of those developer comments and responses to those negative reviews to see what they had to say. And I, for one, have no issue with developers trying to communicate with players, But I think there's also a way to do it where it does feel sincere and it doesn't feel like you're trying to tell people you're wrong about feeling the way you do about the game. And that's why the way Bethesda responded here, it just feels kind of hollow, and it's just not something that's being seen as a positive development. So, for example, here we have a review who did not recommend the game. 256.1 hours on record. They've played this game quite a bit, 183.2 hours played at review time, and complain about many of the things that a lot of people complained about. And looking at the developer response here, they try to justify some of the things that the user complained about. One of the things that they recommend when it comes to like the game just feels kind of boring is to try creating different characters with backgrounds and characteristics that clash or opposite of your previous character. You'll feel like you're playing a totally different game to a degree, but one of the things that people complain about with Starfield is that a lot of the choices you make, especially when it comes to dialogue, just doesn't really seem to affect the outcome of events all that much. There are a handful of key decisions here that do impact who lives and who dies here and there, but generally it doesn't feel like your choices have that much of an influence on the way things play out and, what ending you get and all these things. But Bethesda here insists that when it comes to Starfield, you'll be faced with completely different decisions to make and difficulties to encounter when you make new characters and try new things. There are so many different layers to Starfield that you'll find things you never knew were possible after playing for hundreds of hours. And while it's true that you will find new things with the way New Game Plus works in this game after hundreds of hours, just the process of doing New Game Plus and the process of kind of exploring the content of Starfield is there's just enough sort of roadblocks and friction between you and getting to the interesting content that I feel like looking for all that new content through all the New Game Pluses and whatnot, it's just not something that a lot of people are going to stick with, or even if they do, they'll find the experience just not as good as it could have been. And based on the fact that almost 9,000 people found this review helpful, it seems as though there are plenty of people who agree with a lot of the negative sentiments expressed here, And then right here we have another user review with negative sentiments with over 6,000 people who found this review useful. Now, scrolling down the developer response here, you'll find is basically kind of copied and pasted from what they said in the previous review, where they talk about how you should try creating different characters with backgrounds and characteristics that clash or are opposite of your previous character, and you'll find it to be a totally different game, which again, I don't think is entirely true. Sure, the gameplay style might change a little bit. You could go for something that's stealthy or something that's more gunplay heavy and whatnot, but generally it feels like the outcome of events will be relatively the same, save for a few key moments, rather than this being something that'll be consistent throughout your whole experience, like, say, Baldur's Gate 3, where, every quest and every decision seems to, come back at some point, and there seems to be ramifications to your choices at every turn. That sense just isn't anywhere near as prominent in Starfield. Next up, we have a negative review here with over 4,600 people finding it useful, and one of the key complaints here is about exploration and the way there are so many loading screens and how much you have to access the menu to really traverse space, and just the lack of seamlessness in the experience. Well, the Bethesda representative here responding by saying that the option to fly freely among planets is still there, which just isn't true. Yes, you can bring up the scanner and you can travel from one planet to another and land without needing to open your map, but that's as long as the planet is visible within the area and space that you're in. And even then, you're not really freely flying to planets. You're just kind of activating a loading screen that leads you into the planet, and that's done in such a way where it breaks the illusion that you're genuinely exploring space, whereas in something like No Man's Sky, because you can hop in and out of planets and fly your ship around anywhere truly freely, that is a much more immersive feeling sense of space exploration. In fact, it's already been proven that if you do just try to fly to a planet, you'll essentially just phase through a JPEG. There's no actual planet there to take your ship towards in a seamless fashion. When it comes to fast travel, Bethesda justified it as, remember that fast travel also has its perks, as you can do so quickly when trying to complete quests, and will always be given visual of your ship launching and landing, thus being able to appreciate all the little details that make your customized ship look unique. There are only so many times you can watch that ship landing or ship leaving animation before you kind of grow tired of it and would ultimately just prefer if you could fly in and out of planets seamlessly. And yes, the inclusion of fast travel is not a bad thing, because you can quickly travel to locations and whatnot, which is important for a game that's so massive, previous Bethesda games have had fast travel, but the over-reliance on fast travel in Starfield is what really brings it down. Whereas in past Bethesda games, you'd have to like actually explore and see what's out there and find locations before you could fast travel to them. And so there was this constant sense of like actually having to like be aware of the space around you and always a sense of discovery. Whereas in Starfield, it always feels like you're just skipping all this empty space that doesn't really have much to offer. It's just not worth like taking your ship and just like flying somewhere in a direction, because the odds are you'll probably not find anything. Even in planets, the odds are that as you walk around, you'll find the same outposts that you've seen, procedurally generated before. In the more handcrafted planets, even if you go outside of the main city, there's not much really there. Bethesda here also tries to justify the economy in this game and just the lackluster loot, saying that in terms of game economy, remember that the higher the difficulty you're playing on, the better items you'll receive as a drop. Enemies will be dropping more rare weapons and gear. You'll also be given the option to board and steal more expensive and valuable ships, saying, well, just increase your difficulty to get better rewards. But even generally the best rewards in Starfield even are not all that impressive because of a lack of just general weapon and loot variety. There's no there are very few in the way of like legendary weapons or whatever that feel really unique. And just a lot of weapons in general, given its sci-fi setting, are underwhelming. Even Fallout, I think, just had more unique weapons, whereas Starfield's weapons feel very like vanilla and generic. And a lot of the stuff you get that are higher level weapons, it's just, a weapon that you've already seen before with higher stats or with certain specific mods, but nothing really crazy that makes you feel the sense of, oh my god, this is so cool what I just looted here. Here's another user review with over 4,600 people that found this review helpful. The developer here talks about the excess of loading screens in between fast traveling, saying, just consider the amount of data for the expansive gameplay that is procedurally generated to load flawlessly in under 3 seconds. We believe that shortcoming will not hinder our players from getting lost in the world we created. So I guess this is more of like a technical explanation for why there's so many loading screens, and I'm not saying that there isn't a technical reason for why the game was designed the way it was, but it doesn't change the fact that the excess of loading screens does negatively impact the gameplay experience. It doesn't necessarily hinder the player, but it does make the immersiveness of the game feel far more diminished compared to what past Bethesda games accomplished. For such a vast galaxy, for this being the Bethesda's biggest game volume-wise, it weirdly feels like the smallest because everything is so separated into their own hubs, with space itself just kind of being a hub rather than like a seamless part of the experience. It's the place you go to go to your map and select a destination, basically. The illusion of this just being one seamless tapestry just isn't there as a result of the fragmented nature of this experience that is a result of just how excessive the loading screens are that reveal just how segmented this game is. There's no illusion here that is properly evoked about the sense of being a space explorer. Now, here's one particular response to a review that has especially raised eyebrows. So this is somebody with a review who over 4,400 people found helpful. Scrolling down here, they insist that the way Starfield is designed and the way planets are so empty is not actually boring. It reads right here, we're sorry that you do not like landing on different planets and are finding many of them empty. Some of Starfield's planets are meant to be empty by design, but that's not boring, Bethesda declares here. And then this is a quote, when the astronauts went to the moon, there was nothing there. They certainly weren't bored. Look, don't get me wrong, if I were to go to the moon, I would be just awestruck by the majesty of being in space and being in a completely new landmass in space and stuff. But if somebody told me, let's just walk around the moon all day, and all I found throughout that expedition was just empty space, as cool as it is to be on the moon, I'd eventually get bored of that. Like, the thing that Starfield is supposed to offer is that when you do land on the moon, there's all this stuff to do on that planet, or just there's enough content there to keep you preoccupied. But it just doesn't do enough, and it just stretches itself too thin by having 1,000 planets you can land on or whatever, with the vast majority of them being so empty or having such copied and pasted procedurally generated content that they're not really worth exploring. Like, doing the same activity over and over again in a video game is just not fun, and trying to make a game ultra realistic can be at times to your detriment because realism sometimes is not fun, so you gotta like heighten that stuff through the unique elements of gameplay you can bring to the table with the kind of game that you're making. Bethesda's justification continues: the intention of Starfield's exploration is to evoke a feeling of smallness in players and make you feel overwhelmed. You can continue to explore and find worlds that do have resources you need or hidden outposts to look through. But Starfield's planets, I don't feel like they overwhelm you with a sense of, oh my god, there's so much to do, but rather you eventually start to realize, oh, this is content not even worth exploring, so you start skipping exploring planets and just kind of want to do quests, which are the most interesting aspect of Starfield's content, in my opinion. And because there's a lack of vehicles in this game, walking around planets is genuinely painful because it takes so long to reach a point of interest. So much of planetary exploration is literally just walking around and using your boost pack to try to expedite the process a little bit, but it doesn't really help that much, and just looking at just very monotonous looking landscapes as you try to reach your next destination, which is a couple minutes away or whatever. Like the visual experience of looking at the procedurally generated environments from all these different planets, that's not awe-inspiring enough for that alone to be able to carry exploration of planets. You know, the activities have to be compelling and purposeful and meaningful, and that's just not the case more often than not. And when the same criticism is brought up by other reviews like this one right here with over 4,200 people finding this useful, you'll see that Bethesda has kind of copied and pasted this response. Some of Starfield's planets are meant to be empty by design, but that's not boring, it declares. The same code, it's literally just a copied and pasted thing. Which, yes, copying and pasting helps save time, but it just, this feels like a very like marketing kind of response rather than somebody genuinely engaging with this player's specific feedback. For me, this experience was very boring, and them saying, but that's not boring, and bringing up this quote about real life astronauts, like that's not gonna change my mind or change many people's minds about this. It's also worth noting that going to the moon in real life is a real life experience that can be life-changing, whereas Starfield is ultimately still a video game. You know what I mean? Like going to another planet, a video game has been done before. It's not this magical thing. Next up, we have a response to this user review with over 3,700 people finding it helpful. Scrolling down here, there is justification for aspects of the game's visuals and the clunky UI, stating that Starfield's art direction and overall UI aesthetic is meant to be cohesive and have a NASA punk look. Menus are clean, bold, and neatly organized. I would highly disagree with that. Menus are a bit of a mess in this game and are some of the clunkiest menus I've used. And especially like inventory management is a pain in the ass because it offers so little information and everything's organized in such a rudimentary way that it makes it hard to actually like go through your inventory. It just needed greater features, more enhancements that mods now already offer. And it feels like Bethesda hasn't learned from past entries' clunky UI. And even from mods who've already like fixed this issue. I mean, look, I like the NASA punk aesthetic personally, but the UI itself was something that I really wasn't a fan of. But yeah, Bethesda insists here that menus are clean, bold, and neatly organized with a focal point on the player's character. The skill menu is colorful and iconic, while the inventory shows off items, weapons, and armor in a visually striking way. These UI design choices increase your immersion into the Starfield universe. See, this just feels like Bethesda saying, you're wrong, let me tell you what actually is. This is not, a shit cake. It's actually chocolate cake, which, that's not the kind of feedback that's going to be well received or provide any kind of insight. This just feels like a marketing statement that you decided to throw out there in the hopes of changing people's minds, but you just stating things that people don't feel is accurate is not going to change their minds, or it's not going to change the reality of the flaws of the game. There's also an attempted justification at the fact that the carry weight in this game is so low that it can be disruptive. I mean, inventory management alone is already kind of a pain in the ass, but the fact that you have to do it so often because you're so frequently over-encumbered just doesn't help matters. And they highlight here how you can purchase the weightlifting skill, but even that has its limit, and I don't feel like it was enough for me, even maxing that out, to really smooth out the over-encumbrance issue. They highlight here how you can have your ship's cargo hold carry some stuff, but even the weight capacity of that is much lower than you think it is. And looking at more reviews, you can see that a lot of stuff is just straight up copied and pasted, the same kind of PR sounding statements. Here's one response from Bethesda that does show new text. This one's trying to justify the combat, saying that Starfield has some of the most advanced combat in a Bethesda title to this day. It's one of our players' favorite aspects of the game. I will say that I generally have positive impressions about Starfield's combat, but saying that it has the most advanced combat in a Bethesda title to this day, that's not necessarily a high bar. Bethesda's combat has never been the best feeling. I think Starfield has made some strides on that front, and it is the best feeling Bethesda combat. But compared to other shooters, it still falls short in many regards, but it's still good enough for the type of experience that Starfield is. And then when it comes to criticisms about how the game's stealth systems don't feel fleshed out enough, it says that to experience some of Starfield's better stealth scenarios, we recommend you embark on the Ryujin faction quests. But the thing is, you can create a character who entirely relies on stealth, and it feels like the game really wasn't designed for that, or was designed in such a way where stealth feels very artificial, and you have to really jump through hoops to really make it work. And I kind of felt that way as someone who played a stealth build. The stealth in Bethesda games have always been a little rudimentary, and Starfield felt like an opportunity to just really evolve that aspect of Bethesda games. But it just feels like more of what we saw previously, and in some cases, because of AI inconsistency, stealth can at times feel worse than what it used to be. Here's one more review worth highlighting where the Bethesda developer here, or representative, insists that companions can be valuable allies and assets. I had a lot of complaints actually about companions, because while they can carry your stuff, that's like one thing that can be used for essentially as a backpack of sorts, a walking backpack. The actual element of the companions being an asset when you're engaged in combat, for example, that I rarely found to be true, because companions often walk in front of you as you're shooting someone, or if you're a stealth build like me, they would often just run into combat and just disrupt your stealth plans. The companion AI is bad enough that I never ever wanted to have a companion with me at any given point in time. And in general, the companions and characters in this game, I personally didn't find to be all that interesting, so I wasn't really emotionally invested in them enough to bring them along. But yeah, as far as unique responses go from this Bethesda representative who's responding to these negative reviews, those are the ones I could find, and the rest of the responses we're seeing to other negative reviews, it's basically some form of copied and pasted version of the unique statements that we have seen. It doesn't happen very frequently that a developer will go out of its way to respond to all of these negative reviews on Steam and whatnot. Usually they'll just like keep their heads down and try to work on fixing these issues. But Bethesda just trying to declare that things people have experienced is not actually the experience, when that's what a lot of people are saying. Like, it just comes across as bizarre, and generally people don't like to be told that the experience that they had with something that they thoroughly played is actually not the experience that they had. It just feels like it's brushing aside. It just feels like Bethesda saying we're right and you're wrong, rather than saying, okay, I'll take that into consideration and see, how we can fix things for future entries or future patches or updates and whatnot. So that's kind of the general discussion surrounding these Bethesda responses to Starfield negative reviews on Steam. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's everything you need to know about the situation. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Bethesda's responses to these Starfield negative reviews. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.